In this video, we will be making end-to-end authentication APIs using Django and Django REST framework. We will be able to register a new user using an email and a password. After successful registration, we get an access token, a refresh token, and user details like their ID, username, email, first name, and last name. User also receives an email to confirm the registration. We can also try to log in with the same credentials. And we get the same response here as well. Now, using the access token, we can get user details. For that, we have to hit user's endpoint. If we just execute the API, it will throw an unauthorized error. But when we provide the access token into the header, it returns a proper response. We can also update user details, such as their first and last name. Not only this, but we also have a lot of other endpoints, all on a beautiful Swagger interface. Awesome. So let's get started with the tutorial. I have opened a new directory in VS Code. We can start with creating a Python virtual environment first. Once the virtual environment is created, I will activate it. First, let's update pip to the latest version. Now I will install all the required modules in this project. We will go through each of these one by one. We will be using Django as the core framework and extend its API functionality with Django REST framework. We will be using DJ REST Auth for authentication. Django AllAuth is used by DJ REST Auth. We will use Django REST framework simple JWT to enforce JWT tokens. White noise is used for static file management, such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files for admin panel. DRF is used for generating Swagger UI. We will use PostgreSQL. That's why we have to install SysOp2 binary. Finally, we will use Gunicorn as the WSGI server. Now let's hit enter and wait for all of these to get installed. Awesome, all the modules are now installed. We will save the requirements into requirements.txt file. We are now creating the Django project. It seems we have a new manage.py file and a new directory. Let's run this newly created Django project. And it seems to be running. We will go to localhost port 8000 on our browser. Our Django project is now running. We will now go to settings.py file and start updating the default configurations. First, we will update installed apps. I have added configuration for Django AllAuth, DJ REST Auth, REST Framework, and DRF WSGI. Next, I will set site ID as 1. After that, I'll add 2 new middlewares, one for white noise and another one for AllAuth. Next, we will update static files configuration to use white noise. After that, we will configure authentication mechanism to use email authentication instead of Django's default username authentication. We will also add authentication backends. Next, we will define email backend. In this case, the emails will be not sent to the user. Instead, they will be logged into the console. Later, we'll update this to send an actual email. After that, we will add REST framework configurations, such as permission classes and authentication classes. After that, we will configure REST Auth and simple JWT and import necessary modules. Next, I'll add configurations for Swagger, which will enable Swagger UI as API playground. For now, we are done with settings.py. Now we will move to urls.py. First, we will add URLs for auth APIs and Swagger UI. We will also define schema view for Swagger UI and import all necessary modules. Now everything looks good. We can open Terminal and run migrations for new modules that we have just added. It seems we are missing request library. Let's install that first and then rerun the migrations. Database is now migrated. Let's now create a super user. Give it a username, root, an email, and a password. And now we will run the development server. Server is running. We can go to the admin panel by logging in with the super user credentials. We have logged into the admin panel. Let's go to Users section. We can see one user here, which is the root user. I will manually add first and last name for root user. I will go to email addresses and manually add an email for the root user. Because we have created this user from command line, we have to do this in order to log in using API. I am opening an incognito tab and navigating to the Swagger URL. This will open a beautiful playground for us to try out the APIs. Here, we can see all the default APIs that are already provided by Django, Django REST Framework, and DJ REST Auth. Let's first try out the Login API and log in with the root user's credentials. Awesome. It seems we have received access token, refresh token, and some user details. Now, using the access token, we will try to hit the user endpoint. First, let's try that out without the access token. And it seems to be throwing unauthorized error. We can pass access token into the headers and hit the endpoint again. And it is now returning the user details. Let's also try to update first name of this user using the patch method. Perfect. It has updated the first name. Now let's try to register a new user. It seems a new user is registered, and we are provided with the tokens and user details. For this new user, we can also try the reset password endpoint by passing in the user's email address. Okay. It seems to be throwing an error. To resolve this error, we can add 2 custom routes for reset password endpoint. After making the changes, let's try out the API once again. Awesome. It seems to be working now. But because of our configuration, the email is not sent to the user's email. Instead, it is logged into the console. To send an actual email to the user, we have to update the email configurations. We can define details such as email host, user, and password. For the sake of this project, I will just use my Google account to send emails using Gmail SMTP server. But I can't simply use my Google account password here. Instead, I have to create an app password. To do so, I will navigate to my account on Google and then 2-step verification. Then, in the bottom, I will go to App Passwords. Here, I can create a new app password. I will copy this password and paste this as the email host password value. I can also update email host user and default from email. Let's test out the changes by registering a new user. We will get a temporary email. This time, registration seems to be taking more time. This is because, in the background, it is sending an email to the user. Now, it has returned a response. Let's check for new emails. And yes, we have received an email. This email seems to have a link to activate the account. I will just copy the activation code and manually hit the Verify Email endpoint. In the admin panel, we can check if email is now verified or not. And yes, for this user, it seems the email is verified. Finally, we can try to send a reset password email to this new user. It says password reset email has been sent. So let's check the inbox. We have received a new email. And yes, this is the email with reset password link. This link has two necessary information. First, the user ID. Second, a token. We can copy the token and manually hit the Reset Confirm endpoint. Let's provide a new password along with user ID and the token we copied. Awesome. It says the password has been reset. Let's try to log in this user using the new password. Cool, it has logged in. Initially, we saw this was the email which user received to confirm the registration. In this section, let's see how we can customize this email template. First of all, let's define the templates directory in our settings.py file. Now let's create the file. The confirm sign-up email has to be in this location, which is templates account email. And the file name is email confirmation signup message.html. We can paste this HTML here. It has a basic structure just to test out the change. Now let's get a new temporary email and register a new user. We will wait for the email. And the email is received. Perfect. It seems we have received the email in the new format this time. In the subject, we have the default domain example.com. Let's see how we can change this as well. In the admin panel, we will go to Site section. And there we will change the default site details. Again, let's try to register a new user. Now this time, the email subject is also new. And if we try to see the link of activation URL, the host name is also updated. In this section, we will use PostgreSQL instead of SQLite 3 database. First, in the settings, I will update the databases section with PostgreSQL database configurations. Now, I will create Docker Compose file, where I will define the Postgres service. We have some environment variables and port 5432 mapped to host machine. Also, I have synced the volume to persist the data. Now, I will start the Docker container. It seems the database is now running in the container. I will now open a new terminal and run the development server. Oops. I think we have misconfigured the databases section. Now I've updated the configurations. Let's run the server again. Server is running, but we have to migrate the new database. So let's run the migrations. And create a super user. Perfect. The server is also running. We will go and log into the admin panel. We are logged in. Now we can proceed to Dockerizing the Django project itself. First, I will stop all the running services. Now, I will create a Docker file and add the instructions. We are using Python 3.11.0. We will set /app as the work directory. First, we copy the requirements.txt file. We then update the pip. After that, we can install the dependencies. Finally, we can copy all the files into the Docker container. And here is the command to run the API server. After that, we will move to Docker Compose file and add the API service. We will be later using the environment file. So let's create it. We are also mapping port 8000 to the host machine. And we are also syncing the project files using volumes. We can remove the command from Docker file because we are overriding that in Docker Compose file. We will now create a .dockerignore file to exclude some unnecessary files and directories from Docker context. There is a whole repository about git ignores by GitHub. The same can be used for Docker ignores as well. We can copy the generic Python git ignore file, which is required in this project. Finally, in the terminal, we can build the Docker container and start the services. Services seem to be running. Let's test out by going to the browser. Okay. Here is an issue. The API server is not able to connect to the database. Because the API server is now running on a containerized environment, it can't access the database using localhost namespace. Instead, we have to use the service name, which in this case is Postgres. Let's rerun the containers after the changes. Awesome. Everything seems to be running perfectly fine. In this section, we will be moving all the sensitive information to the environment. Let's start with database credentials. Then we will move secret key as well. Finally, we will move the email credentials. After we have made all the changes, we can restart the services. Services are running. Let's see if the admin panel is working. Yes, it's working. Now let's also try to register a new user to check if we are able to get an email. Yes, the email is also received, which means all the sensitive data is now coming from the environment. I hope this tutorial was helpful. In the upcoming video, we will build UI for these API using React.js. Hit like and drop a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel.